Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Executive Book Club. We once again think we have got an exciting book to share with you, but Rian will mainly guide you through it. I'll make the necessary and unnecessary comments from the side. In the process, you know what the Executive Book Club is all about. It's about knowing that the executives not always having the time to read books or getting to know a book, and we somehow read on your behalf and then share the information here with you. And should you then be interested to go and buy the book and think it's worth your while, then there you go. You've got another body of knowledge on your shelf. So welcome everybody, and I'm looking forward to this. And as Rian said, well, some of you were not online yet. This is his home turf. He did his doctorate in entrepreneurship, so we should be in good hands throughout this session. Rian, over to you.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for that kind introduction. Cool. And before we start, I just want to make a special shout out to the ladies from the IWFSA, which is a women's entrepreneurship group that is currently going through one of our programs. And I think some of them will join now. And I also saw one of my friends, Mary Vinicum, in the audience. So hi. Great. Okay, so today we're going to look at a very interesting topic, which is the lean startup. And it's maybe a bit of a new look at what I'm willing to call as a seminal work. Okay, and it's not often that one looks at a seminal work that was written in 2011, but which sounds like a long time ago, but it's 10 years ago. But it really changed the way that we think about how to start up businesses. It's arguably, it was a fundamental relook of some of the management principles that is relevant to entrepreneurs. And some people call this book the book that launched 10,000 startups. Okay, because it was very much behind the kind of whole Web 2 revolution, the way that we're looking at startups in terms of how it's going forward. So let me get straight into it about the book. It's 307 pages, so lots of good content. It isn't, it's not the type of book that you will really want to read in one sitting. It's a type of book that you can almost look at as a kind of how-to manual, step by step. Do this, check this, learn this, go there. So it's interesting from that perspective, in that it's very practical. It is probably one of the most influential books in how to start a business. And what makes it interesting is it looks at management, but from how do you manage that startup experience, which is very different from how do you manage a normal business. And the way, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but the way that you can think about that is, in most businesses, you should be able to predict what you're going to do next year. In a startup, you might not even know if you're going to be around next month. And that's where this asks those questions. How do you manage within that kind of space? It was written in 2011, which I thought I was convinced I read this somewhere in the 90s, but apparently I didn't. So when it's that thing which you read, which changes your mind so much that you think it's been around forever. And the whole concept of ideas such as pivoting and the minimum viable product and those types of things are now for us so obvious and accepted as obvious ideas in entrepreneurship, but this is where it came from. So he was the first person that really built out that concept of a minimum viable product, first documented different ways to pivot and various kind of growth hacking, the early growth hacking strategies. Okay. The book principally deals with kind of three core sections, which is how do you embed your product development in and your vision, and how do you start, define, learn, and experiment within that? How you then steer that vision towards kind of leaping, testing, measuring, pivoting or persevering, and how do you then accelerate your business from there? So how do you start your engines? How do you make sure that you are getting that minimum viable product out? How do you grow, adapt, and innovate? Okay, and that kind of is also, it's almost a to-do list, like for any business. You have to start, define what you do, learn, build some experiments, etc. And he takes you through each one of those in terms of the context of startups. Okay. If at any point in time you've got any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chats. We will call them out and also answer them, and I'm very comfortable to answer any questions related to this topic. So who's Eric Ries? Okay, so first thing that one has to ask, if you're going to take advice, who are you taking it from? Okay. And he started out as a programmer, so he was somebody that needed to fix problems for companies. And he kind of makes the point in the book to say that often, when we get a programming contract, we go into service level with the client, and even if the client comes up with a stupid idea, we then go and we deliver on this contract, knowing that it's a stupid idea and nobody ends up using it, and that bothered him. Okay, then he found out that as the kind of internet businesses and different things started growing, he had to ask himself, okay, how do I manage people that write code? And then how do I manage the people that manage the people? And then how do I invest in the people that manage the people that manage the people in code? So he went through all of those kind of cycles. And where his particular focus comes from is that he works as a product manager. Okay, so where he constantly had to look at a technical problem and finding a technical solution. So if something didn't work, what's the kind of better architecture, the better engineering, the better process, what's the better discipline, etc. And he started looking at the issue of entrepreneurship in terms of how do we build a better product, and found that works. Okay, so that's what makes Eric Ries a particularly fundamentally new thinker in this space, because he was the first person that said, if we get the product right in a consumer economy, then it should be adopted. Okay, and he built some very kind of structured and disciplined ways in which we're doing that. And his basic premise and his starting point was that new product development is basically done wrong and wastes a lot of time of the customer. Okay, cool. So, so the first thing that Eric does in the book, he says, well, everybody's so excited about entrepreneurship. It's that thing that is cool, innovative, and exciting. Okay, it's that thing which we all want to do. We want to be entrepreneurs. Okay, but we think that management is dull, serious, and bland. Like management is just management. Okay, it's that thing that we do over and over and over again, and if we had to develop a theory of management, because it's it's that thing that just like plan, organize, lead, control. What is it? So that we can describe the fact that we are running around. And he says this is not true. So entrepreneurship is a type of management. It is a way that you are managing, but you need to understand that the type of management that you're going to be required to do is different. Okay, and what he basically concludes in terms of this kind of first section is to say that for you to be successful as a startup is something that it can be engineered by following the right process, which means that you can learn the process. And because the process can be learned, it can be taught, and by implication, it's repeatable. Okay. So I think for a lot of people, you think, well, okay, if I need to go start a business, it's such a daunting task. Okay, but it's actually it's a management problem. Okay. What he then also says is that the principles for lean startup gets from the point of starting and saying that entrepreneurs are everywhere. Entrepreneurship is managed, and it is management. We need to do validated learning. Okay, so if we can get that insight into the consumer behavior at the other side of our product, and we can learn that, we can build a business on it. Okay, but that's going to require us to look at it differently. So we're going to build, measure, learn, and that's going to create a feedback loop. And we need to master something called innovation accounting. So these 5 sections is what the book is really about. Okay, so and the principles of a lean startup, and we'll spend a little bit of time a little bit later just talking about, okay, what is in a lean startup.
So Rian, just a side comment, and I'm sure you will get into the detail of that, especially when you speak about management, because the idea that one sometimes have, if I think back of Virgin Airlines and Richard Branson, they were sitting in a little dungeon in London, and they used the telephone booth at the top of, on the street as their office telephone number, etc. And you almost have the idea of an entrepreneur that got an idea, and now they just fumble through a lot of processes. While with Eric Ries, he's kind of taking the notion from Toyota and with the lean startup and lean manufacturing, and say, no, this is, yeah, there is a lot of creativity, but there's a scientific process here.
And it's so interesting that you're using that example, because he says, like, you know, whenever we see entrepreneurs in a movie, there's this kind of protagonist, and he comes up with an idea, and he's so inspired, you know, and there's all this energy, and then they like show this photo montage, like 3 or 4 photos where they're like busy, like working in a boardroom and like busy typing something, and like they just, and usually those have no sound, and they're like very quick. Okay. And then in Act 3, that becomes all kind of like, you know, busy and like power and like fast cars, and that looks so exciting. Okay, so that's kind of our image of this entrepreneur. But he says everything happens in Act 2. Okay, that is entrepreneurship, and it's damn boring because you are actually sitting there waiting for a customer to walk in through the front door. Okay, and you can only say that hockey stick graph, like you're on the flat part of the hockey stick graph for so long, you know, and if there is no revenue, then you can only say for so long, but we didn't expect any revenue. Okay. And if you've set goals and it's 3 months later, there's only 3 months later, if that revenue didn't come, then those goals didn't achieve. Yeah, so that's the real angst and the real stress of being an entrepreneur. It is that tough thing to do every step going forward, so that you are breaking through to the point where this product of yours starts selling, and starts selling itself. And he says it's always a balance between understanding which customers should we listen to and who should we ignore, okay, and prioritizing the right product features, and deciding what are the measures so that we know if we are making progress. Okay, so those are the 3 things that he says is kind of that initial, that is entrepreneurship. Okay, now if I ask the average person to define entrepreneurship, and I mean, like, I can give you textbook definitions till tomorrow. It's somebody that controls resources that they are not in command of, or, you know, it's that. But he says this is what you should do. You should be listening to your customers, deciding what those customers mean to you, and deciding what are you going to give them, and then have that measurement system by which you say, like, okay, how am I knowing that I'm actually servicing my customer? And that, I think, is it's a very different way to look at it. But I can relate to it in terms of having now started, I think, 18 businesses in some way or form. That's the thing. And Frank, you've had your fair share of experiences as well. Good. Okay, let me just see. Okay, so what's a startup? I think that's an important thing to ask as well. So that entrepreneur is somebody that is creating something under new and under extremely uncertain conditions. Okay, and I thought that was a very useful way to think about it. Like and that's why I think that there's a lot more entrepreneurs around. And especially now, I'm seeing a lot of entrepreneurship type activity, because the conditions are extremely uncertain. You don't know if you're going to have a license to operate next week, and you don't know if you are allowed to sell alcohol or not. But the kind of COVID rules changed a whole lot of things, but we also live in a very complex world right now where some of the dynamics have changed. So an entrepreneur is somebody that creates something new under extremely uncertain conditions. I think the other thing that was useful there to say, when you become an entrepreneur, you're no longer the marketer or the designer or the engineer or the accountant. You're no longer the specialist in that business. You're now somebody that needs to run the startup experiment, which I spelled wrong there. Not experiment, my bad. You need to run the startup experiment to the point where you stop wasting other people's time. Okay. So I thought that was a very nice way to describe starting up a business. It's like it must be something useful. Okay. So, and until it is something useful, you're actually just wasting people's time. So your objective of the entrepreneur is to employ the scenario to get to a point where your idea isn't just an idea, it is something which is actually adding value to people. I thought that this was a very interesting graph. So these were Web 2 startups. So on the left-hand side here, you've got all the companies that started, and this was about 2011, and that called themselves Web 2 companies. Okay. And those dots through there are all the ones that failed fundamentally, never kept on existing. Now, some of these were bought and sold, etc., etc. And if we had to draw this graph today, this will be all the companies that was left on there. Okay, so that's and this is for the web. You know, this is where there isn't physical infrastructure or complex things. And I looked through this, and there's like maybe 4 or 5 of these that I've used in my life. You know, so and that's the thing that we have to realize is that a lot of ideas fail, a lot of businesses fail, but then asking why they fail, one has to ask, okay, what did these do right, and what did the others do wrong? Okay. And could more of them survive, etc. And ultimately, it's about having something that's relevant to a customer. So, and that's kind of where the book kicks off in terms of the meat of it, saying we often get into building businesses, building things that nobody wants. Okay, and then as well, the entrepreneur kind of gives up at some point in time because they haven't lived up to its aspirations. So if you wanted to start out a teleportation, like with teleportation, and you failed to find a way to do that, that's okay. But if you've started to do a business, you don't really know what that business needs to do, then yeah, you're going to end up building things that nobody wants. Okay, so and also just on a philosophical note, he said probably in the future GDP of countries will be directly linked to the character of the imagination of the people in those countries. And I thought that that's it's a prophetic statement. And I'm not sure if that's why, I'm not sure how we're doing in our GDP on that as a measure yet. Okay, so to get to that point where your businesses are working, one of the key ideas that he spends a lot of time on, and there's a couple of these, so I'm just going to delve into one of them, one or two of them today, is the idea of a pivot. Okay. Now, one example is to say, you know, two guys sit and talk, and the one guy asked the other guy, so, you know, I heard you got divorced recently, and the other guy said, no, I just pivoted to a different relationship. Okay, which I thought was kind of a funny way to think about it, but okay. In a pivot, you're changing direction and staying grounded while staying grounded in what we've learned. Okay. So let's say that you're in a particular business. So I decide I want to sell something like it's very hot in my area and I want to sell something cool. I tried different things. I tried selling frozen yogurt and ice cream. Okay. I figure out that frozen yogurt works and ice cream isn't necessarily the thing that works. Okay. Now, a pivot would be then, let's focus on frozen yogurt. Okay. But maybe I'm spending more time on making the counter more efficient so that it can sell more frozen yogurt. Okay. So how do I make it faster? Then a pivot doesn't mean that I then go off and I go and change the business to sell peanuts or try something completely different. Okay. It doesn't mean I'm changing direction. Fundamentally, I'm taking the learning that I've got and that I've done out of one cycle of iteration, and I'm building on that. Okay. And maybe in time I find out that that over-the-counter idea did work. Okay. But I start trying to figure out how can I sell more, and I say, well, I will go deliver frozen yogurt to your house. And I find that that's more profitable, makes more money, and gets a higher adoption than over the counter. Then I have to ask the question, do I run both sides of the business? Do I run the over the counter business and the delivery business or not? If I make more money from just delivering to, I may abandon the counters in total. Okay. If I abandon the counters in total and then I find out people don't take my home deliveries anymore, then I've also learned something. Okay. So that's the point, is every time I need to have a kind of structured, very deliberate set of objectives that I achieve over a period of time that makes me evaluate, is this working or not? Okay. And I think that's something that for me, when I was starting different businesses, I realized that we don't really understand this concept, because some people take this idea of a pivot and said like, oh, okay, cool, I will go and I'm going to try one thing, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to try another thing. And that's not it. That's not what this does at all. It says that I need to change one other thing in the business at a time. Okay. Try it, see if it works. And then Ries is a very philosophical person and actually very well educated in terms of the way that he goes about this stuff. He said, well, our objective as a business owner is to reduce the time between pivots to increase the odds of success. Okay? And in fact, he later proposed that a business should evaluate every 6 weeks if you pivot or persist. Okay. So every 6 weeks, you should be looking at, okay, did the objectives that we set out to achieve in the previous 6 weeks get us to where we needed to be as the startup, and what do we need to change at that 6 week point to survive the next 6 week point?
Okay. So Rian,
this
is a very important point and an interesting point. So in my mind, I've got a question now. Is that so? Pivoting means changing of direction. So is that new direction pre-thought of? In other words, do we have it almost as options A, B, and C, or is it a random act?
And that's a very interesting question and view to it, because Ries also says the reason why we say every 6 weeks, okay, is because we might find out 3 days in that this is not working, okay, but we need to give it some time. So we go and design a deliberate experiment for the next 6 weeks, okay, in which we will take this direction. Let's say we don't know if our product's going to work for consumers or for businesses, okay? So what do? Okay, we set up an experiment to say, for the next 6 weeks, we've seen that some consumers buy our product, okay? For the next 6 weeks, we're going to focus on selling to consumers, okay? At the end of that 6 weeks, we evaluate what we've learned. So consumers they're more interested in a particular type of experience, which that we struggle to provide that. Okay, cool. Now we can decide, do we create that experience, or do we test the idea that we should be selling to businesses? Okay, so that's kind of one way to think about it. So it is fairly deliberate. And it is also very systematic. You have to look at this systematically, because if you don't, what is the next path? But we can't necessarily, in starting kind of pivot block A, anticipate what's going to happen in pivot block B, but we can have some ideas and we've got some success criteria, okay, in terms of saying, okay, this is what we need to learn so that we understand what's going to happen next. And if that goes this way, we can already anticipate what's going to happen there. Okay. So we often hear in entrepreneurship that people talk about your runway. So your kind of investment runway, or how much capital you've got. And he defines runway in terms of how many times to pivot do I have left. Okay, which I thought is like, okay, how many times do I change the game before I call this a day? Okay, so that's I thought was a very useful way to think about. And if we can figure out how to pivot sooner, that extends our runway. Okay, so especially, and he says, especially with young businesses, you might make that cycle in the beginning much shorter, where I sit and say, like, I want to look this week if I can sell to 5 customers. Okay, cool. And then 3 days in, you haven't sold. 4 days in, you haven't sold. 5 days in, okay, cool. I need to change something fundamentally differently. I need to take it another way, so that you are constantly innovating at that very early stage. And then as it builds more momentum, I could maybe make my cycle a little bit longer. Okay. So I thought this is an extremely useful way to think about an aspect of building a business, because I think what often happens is it's absolutely uncertain. You don't know who the product is, who the customer is, what the product is that you're going to sell them, what price point they're going to be interested at buying this. You don't know any of that stuff, okay? And you need to figure it out. And to figure it out, like using a lean methodology, we need to get to that next stage as fast as possible, so that we can take the learning and then build it into the product going forward. So, and that's kind of where the idea of lean manufacturing, as you alluded to earlier, comes in, to say in traditional product value, our objective was just to get to the next stage. And that waterfall method works because the problem and the solution stays the same. Okay. If I've got a problem and I keep working towards that problem, then I'm going to get to the same solution over time. Okay. And in traditional product development, successfully building the wrong thing is highly likely. Okay. So if you told me to go build a phone and it must look like that, then eventually I'm going to get to a way to do that. But he says to define failure is very important for an entrepreneur, and achieving failure is successfully executing a bad plan. Okay, because we need a good plan, or a decent plan now, and then get that to the next thing. And the customer is the most important part of the production line. Okay, and what happens is in an agile kind of business, computer development and business development, the problem is known, but the solution is unknown. Okay, so you can, if you iterate fast enough, you can get to a solution that's closer to solving the problem. Okay, so you can satisfy the customer, but what do we do when we don't know who the customer is? Okay, and in entrepreneurship, we don't know what the customer wants, so we're trying to figure that out. Okay, and that's what makes entrepreneurship such an interesting kind of management problem, is we don't possibly know who the customer is, what they want. We don't know how to solve the problem yet. And yeah, so we know nothing. Okay, and our objective is to start knowing things so that we can get to the thing. So so to kind of get to that point, and this is the heart kind of the lean startup methodology, is following a process where I'm discovering who my customer is, I'm validating who that customer is, I validate how can I create this customer, and then I work on how do I scale the company to do more of this. Okay, and combining that kind of customer development side with it on with the agile development side of it, which is state the problem, develop a solution, see how this feeds our hypothesis. And these two cycles kind of interreacting with each other is the essence of the lean startup methodology. So yeah, I mean, when I look at it from that perspective, it started making sense to me to say, okay, great. Once I understand what I'm trying to solve, I develop a solution, and that is feeding a customer hypothesis, then yeah, I will very quickly start getting to a point where I have better knowledge and I have a better way to service that customer. And that's just kind of the heart of the book.
I think this gives a lot of flesh to his point of you have to learn faster than anyone else.
Yeah.
It's not just a saying. There's a methodology in this. It's not just about firing up brain processes. It's actually an application methodology in terms of the pivoting. So
Yeah.
put that experiment out there. Put metrics to it. If it doesn't perform to those metrics, change direction. Put metrics to that. Change direction and keep maintaining your runway.
Absolutely. So it's interesting, and this left side of the picture, this customer discovery, validation, creation, and scaling, isn't actually his methodology. Okay, and this was a methodology in B2B sales. And his view is just when you go to kind of mass consumer businesses like the Googles of the world, etc., they've taken this process and using highly sophisticated methods and growth hacking, they are actually creating that utilizing this process to do so. And so he mentions another book which inspired him, and that talks about that process, which I'm sure we'll review one of these days. But I thought it's worthwhile to mention it here. The book is called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which I thought was a very nice name for a book. Successful Strategies for Products That Win by a guy by the name of Steve Blank. And it talks in extensive and kind of very prescriptive detail on how to discover a customer, how to validate a customer, create it and build it. But he does so in a B2B, like large scale sales process. What's interesting in that is in a B2B scenario, you have a tendency to be able to learn who your customer is and know something about them. Okay, but in a consumer scenario, you don't necessarily know. Okay, because that retail customer, how do you get to know what that person looks like unless you literally take your product, walk out to them, go look them in the face and say, will you buy this? Okay, but there's some classic examples that he gives in terms of negotiating the first exchange of value. So they took a startup to China to sell a certain type of medical equipment, like the next whiz bang kind of tool. And they went to all of the doctors and they asked them, would you buy this? And they were all very polite and they said, yes, 100% satisfaction. So the metric shot through the roof. So now they could go off for 3 years and develop the product because they had proof that that's demand in China. Okay. And they thought just to go back and do another experiment to sit and say, how many of those people would be willing to sign a letter internally to their business to say, I recommend buying this product? And they had zero uptake. Okay. So, that's the kind of things which you want to discover. What is your customer and then validate it. Okay. And then figuring out how you're going to get the customer creation part, as how you're going to get to the next set of customers, and the company building side, which is in a lot of detail. So this is just an example. One of the assumptions that we often make in our products or in our kind of business setups is that there will be word of mouth. Yeah, like people will talk about this. Okay, cool. And in the book and also in one of the other stories that I listened through him, he talks through his particular company, which they make 3D avatars that you could use on social media and other types of things. And one of their first experiments was they thought that everybody would love this. Okay, so they got some people into a room, and they said, well, what you need to do is you download this app. Okay, it installs an extension to your existing chat app, like WhatsApp or whatever you're using, and then you could have this 3D guy that sells you stuff. Okay, so come in, download the app, download the extension, link it to. And the first thing that people told them, well, okay, so why wouldn't I want to download another? Why would I extend what I've got? Yeah, like why would I want to put a 3D thing in WhatsApp? Like, and they said, well, okay, but because we thought that you wouldn't want to get another client like a Signal or Telegram or one of the other things. We didn't think that you would want another messaging app. It says, but I've got 7 messaging apps already, so why wouldn't I need an 8th one? Yeah. And so this stunned them immediately. Okay. The next step that the person had to do is to invite one of his friends to use the app because they thought that that would be a natural thing. And the first thing that people wanted to know is, well, will it be cool? Like would their friends think it's cool? Okay. So if our assumption is that our product will give us word of mouth, we assuming that the decision criteria here, which is cool, okay, being cool to somebody else, will be satisfied. And then after they did the usability test on that, it turns out that the person didn't want to let other people know that this is something interesting because coolness is this decision factor for them. To make the decision, if it's cool, they want to experience it. So what these guys did is they made it like a special mode for this application where you could like test it now, like message yourself, see what it's going to look like, all of that type of stuff. Okay, because they're now learning, see? They've gone through this iteration stage. So people said they want to experience its coolness. So now they've spent another 6 weeks building something that the person could experience it, etc. And then when people started playing on it, when they called them in again, they decided it's lame. So they refused to recommend it. Okay. So like, okay, 6 weeks later, then you figure out, okay, this is it. So this strategy of word of mouth strategy, which was going to be that everybody's going to recommend it to everybody else because they believed it was cool, didn't work. And now you needed a new approach, okay? And you needed to test if that works. So one of other strategies that they then tried is, what if we pay people to use the product, okay? And what they eventually did is they developed their own client, and they paid some people to use the product, and then they started growing. And I was checking it out recently; it still exists. Okay, so if it tested and it works, then we do more of it, and if we need to move out of it, we do. Okay, but it's better for us to do that earlier rather than later. Okay, because if you just go on with this, people will recommend it by word of mouth. Then eventually you're going to fail and you're going to wonder, how the hell did that happen? Yeah. And the guy tells a story where he was the guy that wrote that original integration, and he said 24,000 lines of code that took him, nearly killed him, and they had to chuck it all out. And that's what you need to be willing to do as an entrepreneur sometimes, as you are discovering exactly how you're going to grow your business.
Okay. That must be one of the most difficult things to do for an entrepreneur, because even before you went into action, you have thought about this. You lie in your bed and you think of this idea, and you write on glasses and on pieces of paper and on serviettes, etc. And now now you're so excited, and you start, and now you have to pivot.
Exactly.
And you've got this emotional attachment because this is almost like your child.
And that's exactly what it talks about, regret. So after that time, you sit, it's like, did we need to do this? Could we have done something else? Did we make a good enough plan? Yeah. And the worst is if an investor asks you that. Okay. Because that's what happens. Like, wasn't that obvious? Like, and you sit there, it's like,
me.
Did you use my money to learn this? Like, that's the kind of stuff that you get into as an entrepreneur, okay? Especially when investors are involved. So, so a key learning must come out of this pivot, okay? So we must learn and progress and adapt, otherwise we'll die, yeah. So that changed the whole strategy for the rollout in that specific case. Okay. The other question that you need to ask yourself is, does it have to take 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 days to learn? So, and this is something that I found also in my own research, is that entrepreneurs make things too complicated. So in South Africa, I did some research a couple of years ago. I worked with a couple of thousand of entrepreneurs, and we looked at what the factors are that made them fail. So more than 70% of the people that we met had registered companies, have been registered with Cipro, were 100% up to date with all their VAT and tax returns, but had never created a product brochure or a flyer that told anybody what they're selling. Okay. So that's the type of thing that's an easy way to find out if something will sell. Go make a brochure, walk up to somebody and say, will you buy this product? And they said, no. So do you know somebody that might be interested in buying that product? Okay. And we found that if you do that, if you ask 80 people around a specific product, you after that have a very good idea if somebody's going to, and you will know exactly what people need for that product in order to buy it from you. You'll know which price points work, etc. And if so, and this is the thing that I think we often forget, okay, is that it's easy to, and entrepreneurs are very bad at this, because what we think we should do in the beginning is hide our product from everybody. It's better to talk about your product and find out if it's going to fail, okay, than hiding it, wondering if it's going to happen. And then, like, when it doesn't work, you like wonder, why did that happen? And then when you actually want it to start working, you haven't told anybody. So now we've invested all of this money. So I'd rather go out there, ask people. And he says, like, if you are going to build a full blown out rollout of all of your products and services, you're going to lose money. Okay. Launch it or start it when it's got one feature. Find out if that feature works, if people want that. And he described the one scenario where he walked up to the guy and he's like saying, well, here's the product and it only has this feature. Well, this is what it does. And the person says, well, that's really horrible. I believe that it should have these other 4 things. And he sits and says, oh, thank God, those are on my roadmap. Yeah. So it's a validation of what I'm about to do.
Yeah.
Okay. If that person walks at that one point and tells you this is crap, like I will never buy it in my life. Like, I don't know what this is. And then, your ego will be crushed, but you would have saved time, money, effort in terms of getting the next steps going. So, and he even suggests, like, create a web page that offers the specific feature and just track if somebody finds it from a small advert that advertises the feature. If you do something like that online, or you hand out a brochure or a flyer, or you discuss it in your church group or whatever, then at least you find out that it works or doesn't work. Okay. So, and that he says, we have to understand that fundamentally a startup exists to determine if you can achieve sustainability from a specific product. Until you do, you need to innovate the product, your customer base, and the delivery system until it works. Okay. And the core question that he asks is, as an entrepreneur, I need to evaluate, am I asking the question and am I answering the question, we are learning how to be sustainable? Are we actually learning how to be sustainable? That's the thing that you should have in the top of your mind. Okay. Because if I'm not learning what it is to become sustainable, then I failed in my entrepreneurship journey. So I thought that was a very interesting view on it.
And
cool.
is that what he means with validated learning? So it's
absolutely. Anything other than working towards sustainability is a complete waste of time. Okay, but that becomes the measure. It's like, is this going to make us more sustainable or not? Are we proving something that might make us more sustainable or not. So then he also says that the idea is to get better at this. So we know that I've got an idea, I need to build it, I need to implement it or code it, measure it, get the data from it, learn idea. So that's kind of the lean cycle. And he says that where this is exceptionally useful, so if you can do this obviously faster than anybody else, then you're learning faster than everybody else, and that makes you more successful. And that's not a new idea. It's in the military strategy. It's in all sorts of other places. You need to adapt faster than your enemy, then you win the war. But where he uses this, which I thought was very interesting, was just kind of a side comment that he made, is does the advice you take on your business move you faster through the cycle? Yeah. Okay. I think that was for me an entrepreneur. I mean, you tell somebody it's like I'm going to start a business. What's the first thing? It's like you should really think about this. You should worry about that. You know, like, oh, so and so that started a business did this. Maybe you should try that. Yeah. He says the only way that you listen to that noise is if it makes you move faster through the cycle. Okay. Don't get distracted by what you need to do. I've got an idea. I need to build it, implement it, measure it, get the data, learn, come up with the next idea, etc., etc. Don't go and follow some other person's like kind of fake advice or impression of, oh, would Steve Jobs have done it this way, or how did Microsoft get here? You know, it's like that doesn't matter. It's all about this cycle. It's all about minimizing the total time to go through one iteration of this loop. That's how you innovate. And I thought that was a very useful way to think about it. Cool. And then I thought that this was an interesting dimension, and you would recognize that we're kind of traveling through that structure in the beginning, but innovation accounting. So he basically makes the statement that accounting was invented to hold managers accountable. Okay, but when there is no history, so if we've got a stable running business, then we make a forecast, yes, and that forecast should be fairly accurate towards what should happen next year, because we understand that the conditions are the same, the product's the same, the market's the same, etc. And we can sit and say it will be up or down by X. We put in a new initiative, we know that that's likely to bring in Y. But where there is no history, how do we create accountability for a predictable result? Okay. So how do you account in an innovative scenario? And he makes the point to sit and say he's never seen an actual prediction by an entrepreneur that turned out to be that, because an entrepreneur will always get the number of customers wrong, the products that he eventually sold, the cost that was going into it, etc., etc. So how do we then evaluate how we should account for this? And it says basically what you need to be very mindful of is somewhere in your business model there is a statement around how customers will be behaving when we sell our product. Okay, and that's the thing that you should go and model and work, understand your accounting aspects around. Okay. Cool. So, and that's what you should be holding yourself and also your business model accountable to figure out what is that customer behavior that drives selling many products. Okay, because that's what you're trying to discover, and that's the thing that only when that is clear will your accounting start making sense, will your predictions start making sense, and will your business start making sense. So and I know it sounds like an abstract idea, but I think it is very real. It's like, well, we know, for example, in our business that what make customers behave the way that they do is when we sell accredited products. You know, that's the thing that when you understand that, you can understand where our business will be going. Okay, but in another business, what makes them work is that a person wants a shiny car. Okay, and that's why they sell a shiny car, although there is other cars that aren't that. So somewhere in there, that's that key insight that you are looking for. Okay, so he then also gives us a kind of map for learning milestones that a business should seek to achieve. Okay, so first is to establish the baseline, which is to build a minimum viable product. And a minimum viable product, as we highlighted earlier, could be a one-page flyer that says, "I'll sell this to you." Okay, that is as much as you need for a product. Customer based on a flyer, then you can go and build it. And I've seen many entrepreneurs do this. Okay, or it is one of an item that you walk up to the person and you try to sell it to them, and if they buy it, you know that I've got something. Okay, you need to measure how customers behave right now. Then you need to tune the engine, so experiment to see if we can improve our metrics from the baseline towards the ideal. Okay, and that is so. If I start and I sell the product, I need to find what's happening here. So if I sold 1 today and 2 tomorrow, 5 the next day, 7 the next day, and then it starts being 7.5, and my goal was to sell 10, then I will get there. Yeah. So if my goal was to sell 10 and I see that kind of progression, then I'll get there. But if I see selling 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 3.5 and then 3.6 and then 3.7, will I ever get to 10? Not unless I do something very differently. Okay, and that's how we need to tune the engine, to experiment to see if we can improve the metrics from the baseline towards the ideal. And if it doesn't get to that ideal, then we need to say, what are we doing differently? So that's where the goal setting in the learning milestones are very, very important. So the things that are important in terms of the way that your customers behave are things that you should set goals for, see if you can get there, and if you can't, and that doesn't lead you towards sustainability, then realize that you are going to fail. Okay, so if your business model is premised on selling 1 a day and you can't get to selling 1 a day, then you need to do something differently. And if you don't get there, then yeah, you will in time disappear. So you either need to sell something. Yes, Brooke.
So innovation accounting then are these 3 things that, if I understand you correctly, is implement your MVP, try that product, and then see how it performs to the baseline and approximate that baseline to where you've set it and increase it, and then make a decision, pivot or persevere.
Exactly. So when the experiment reaches a diminishing returns, okay, so the minute you start seeing that this is not getting any better, it's time to pivot. Okay, and that's I think if as an entrepreneur you can learn this lesson, you'll do exceptionally well. Okay, because I've seen, I can tell you that this works. Okay, it's a good way to think about the world, and if you have a goal, for an example, that 10% of your customers should register for your product on your website, and you start finding out and only 1%, and then 2%, and then 5%, and you can get to 10%, then you know you're onto a good thing. But until then, you need to be improving your website. If you keep on improving your website, but it stays the same or stays flat or it actually goes down, then you know you're not moving in the right direction. You're never going to get to 10%. So maybe the website isn't the way that you're going to do this. Okay, or you need to do something else, because otherwise you're going to run out. You need to tune. So that's where the pivot or persevere decision comes. And it might be very hard because you might have gotten to 5%. But then it's half of the results that you're going to need for sustainability. So stop being an idiot, find another way. And that's the hard stuff of entrepreneurship. And that's also why they say entrepreneurship doesn't really work for intelligent people, but for people that can persevere, because you're going to have to persevere, try something different, get it right, do it over and over and over again until it's right. Okay. Cool. And then just kind of to end off, some practical takeouts. Make specific concrete projections on what is going to happen. I think that's the thing that we often forget. as we're in the flow of things. Like, we need to predict in the next 6 weeks what's going to happen and start working towards that. We need to make specific behavioral projections for our customer. We need to create an environment for which we can build, measure, and learn. And that's the same if you're doing it for business to business or business to consumer. The idea of failing fast or pivoting away from your problems is very, very important. And pivoting shouldn't be a disaster. It should be a celebration, because it means that we've got one less step, and we're not going to fail, and at least we can have the learning. So those are the kind of very practical takeouts that I took from this book. Just on the commercial side, we have, of course, an entrepreneurship. And this also fits very well into our managing knowledge and innovation space, the introduction to digital marketing and managing operations. So if you want to learn more about those types of things, and this types of methodology, then that fits very well into that, where we discuss this and other approaches. Cool. That's what I have to say today, Frick.
Thanks, Stack. Here's let me just quickly check here. In the book, it states we must learn what customers really want, not what they say they want or what we think they should want. How do we know what customers really want?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the classic examples is, did you know that you wanted a really large portable hand phone that had like your email and messages and calendar and an app to play chess and what else? A puzzle game on it. Did you know that you wanted that? Like, no. But did the guy that built an app store? No, probably not either. Okay. But by creating it and then understanding that key behavior that the customer is displaying, I must then ask, okay, so what am I doing in that key behavior of that customer? So, and yeah, so we never as customers knew that we wanted this device, but now we can't imagine how the world was without it. Okay, could that really have been known? And the answer is no. Okay, so the startup that started that didn't know that. They believed it, but they kept on testing different ways to get there. And then when some of it that works or didn't work got rejected or accepted. So one of the, and Apple is a very good example here of the type of company that does it. They run constant innovation teams, and the best ideas float to the top, and the ideas that get adopted by customers are the ideas that roll out in the next release. So the things that you see have been thoroughly tested by customers. It's been understood why they do what they do, and the growth hacking behind it in terms of getting it to work has been fully understood. So and that's the way that you should be thinking as an entrepreneur about your product, is who's using it, why they're using it, what made them use it, and how can I get into that decision-making unit of theirs and put another product in there or the same product into that so that it actually works. And only then will, and in my experience, the best way to find out what a customer wants is to ask them or to present something to them. And if they say, oh, that's interesting, then yeah, go with that.
Yeah, it would seem that from what I understand from the book and partially trying to answer this question is that you have an idea, the customer doesn't know, you also don't really know, but you think you know, and you take this product to the market, you test it in that first period with it, and the features that they don't like, you strip out of it, and maybe like that other guy example that you gave, they may sound back a feature which you add and you test it in the next iteration, and that's how you and the customer come to understand what we really want. And after a number of years, you sit with your iPhone like you have now, and you've got access to all of this, which you didn't know at the start.
And also, the question is, do you need to know what one customer wants or what all customers wants? Okay, so I can figure out how to sell 1, 10, and then 100. Okay, so that's what I need to look at, is what will it take to sell it to one person? Somewhere out there in the world, there is somebody that probably wants your product. Okay, and Eric Ries has a lot of thoughts about early adopters and like evolutionary how the customer journey evolves. So somewhere in the world, there is somebody that would be zealous about buying your product because that solves their problem. So you have to find those people and understand from them what really makes it work. But there are other people that will look at that and sit and say, this product is only being used by crazy people, okay, and then not buy it. So he uses the example of Google Glass specifically, like because all these cool hippie people walked around with like these glasses, it didn't actually end up being a product that was used because everybody's like, oh, okay, this is for like really weird people walking around. I wanted one, but it never saw the consumer market because it didn't solve the right problems for those markets. So we must also be very careful to look at bias and all of those types of things as well in the process. I realized that we're out of time, but yeah. The recording of this will be available. You can ask for the presentation from the people that send out the recording. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rian. Enjoyed it. I think really it's a book worth buying and reading, especially on the scientific aspects around the testing and the metrics and all of that, which we can't have time. We don't have the time to share that here, but it's really a worthwhile read.
Cool. And happy Easter, I think, for everybody that's
You.
cool. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.